listening to the Omar the Barbarian podcast. We back in the building. I got Kelly Nugent on deck. We're talking Exile. Her new podcast is fire. Kelly, can you believe we've known each other? We've been working together in some capacity for about 4 years now. Can you believe that?
I cannot believe it's been 4 years.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it either. I just know this. Exile is heat. We're going to get into it. Just so you know, spoiler warnings, y'all. We're going to deep dive in this episode probably through the first 3 that she's done. So if you haven't heard Exile, you need to stop listening to this. Go listen to that. Come back and listen to this as we chop it up. You feel? All right, here we go. Man, Kelly Nugent in the building. I'm excited, y'all. Kelly she does it all and does it all phenomenally. Voice actor, television personality, writer, apparently a phenomenal podcaster as well. So let's just get into it. Exile. Exile is a story about a woman who is exiled from her hometown because she is accused of a crime that she claims she did not commit. And the show chronicles her attempt to return home as she tries to survive the wilds. Is that?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this. How did you come up with this concept? Have you had this for a while? Like, how did you come up with this thing?
Well, so I had been sitting on this idea for a while. Like, I started with this like a skeleton of this idea.
Okay.
And I had this idea of what I wanted to happen in the 6th episode, which we won't talk about. But I had this idea of what I wanted to happen. And I was like, I'll figure that out. You know, I was like, I'll get from like A to Z somehow. And I had been GMing this show on Hyper RPG, which is a tabletop RPG Twitch channel called Roguelike, which was basically it was a very like rules light game with a rotating cast where based on like dice rolls and based on what people would donate the chat, I would just make up a campaign on the fly. And I had like specifically episode 3 was one that I had improvised. Like the situation that happens in episode 3 was like the what's it called? The monster of the week for that was the bones of that were in a campaign that I had done. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I have a million ideas. And I had stopped doing that show because I started getting busy with other projects. And I was like, you know what? I am going to just do it. I'm just going to write it. And then quarantine happened and I was like, oh my God, what else am I doing? I'm just going to write all of these. And so I basically I had written episode 1 and had episode 1 written for like a year, maybe even more, and just sat on it and didn't do anything. And then I rewrote it because kind of interestingly, as you were talking about the why of it all, or like breaking the rules or whatever. I actually rewrote it because I was thinking about like why today, like why is this character leaving today, you know? And because she's been out in Haven for 64 days. So why on the 64th day is she deciding to go back? And so that part where she imagines, you know, in a second, she imagines a whole other life in which she's never rescued and she dies in the wilds and the town celebrates her and all that. That I added. And when I added that, I was like, I'm just gonna write the rest of this. And then I did over a period of like maybe 3 weeks, I wrote and performed all of it.
All right. So let's start at the top and let's talk through it. She gets exiled from Haven, and Haven is her hometown. And you break that down in the show. She finds herself, I think you said it was like a 5-day journey from Haven to this hut that she finds herself in. And she stays in this hut for 64 days. Now, what I find really fascinating is your world. To me, it's sort of this combination of high fantasy and modern fantasy. It's so brilliantly done because it gives you so much room as a creator to really go anywhere you want and it fits. So, world building wise, how did you come up with this world that is both high fantasy, current fantasy? How did you come up with this thing?
Well, I wanted something that was like so post-apocalypse that and the apocalypse not really being I like stuff where it's like the elephant in the room is something we're not going to talk about. So it was like it's so post-apocalypse, but the story isn't about what brought about this apocalypse. It's about this woman. But so I wanted something that was so post-apocalypse but had some remnants of that technology, right? Because she's talking into a tape recorder. There's typewriters. There's items from before that people know about. But at the same time, it's kind of like futuristic, primitive, sort of like, but think of it as like the type of technology that they would have in like Puritan times, and then like add some stuff from like what maybe would have been left over from a time before. So that was kind of like, as far as technology, what I was thinking of. And then I was thinking a lot about, well, so the thing that like kind of pushed me to really start writing this again is a bit of a spoiler, so I'm not going to say what it is, but just like there were things that happened that I was like, oh, all right, I need to just write this thing and like do it, because I had certain ideas for like how I wanted her memories to unfold and how, you know, I thought it was a cool way to learn about two different sides to a culture, right? Like there's the culture inside of Haven and then there's the culture of the world. So she's learning it all as we are, as far as the world, because she's never been outside of Haven. And then her culture of Haven is her explaining it to us, as out, or to her recorder as a memory, but then also kind of like explaining it to us. And as you see in the episodes, with more and more awareness of what the world as a whole is like. And so how Haven compares to the world. So at first it's like, when she in episode 1, when she's describing Haven, she's like, it's so beautiful, like all the houses are uniform, and even like little word choices I chose like to demonstrate what kind of society she lives, where she says that the grass is not vulgar, like she's like, it's green and lush without being vulgar, which like intimates to you as the listener that she's part of a puritanical society that maybe, and like things like where she sees an elder walking by and she smiles at him chastely, and like that's kind of like, okay, well, we know something about like something's not like, she keeps saying, I can't wait to get back, I can't wait to get back, but at the same time she's also experiencing things out in this world of the wilds, which is like very, very scary and very different. And at the end of the first episode, right, she's like, I hate it out here. There's no council to keep people safe. But then as you learn more about Haven, you're like, well, how safe was Haven? And she's kind of learning that too. So if you listen to the performance of it too, just from in her memories, how she sounds at the beginning versus how she sounds at the end of the series is very, yeah, it's the same person, but it's a person that's been through different things, whether that be external things, right, like the monsters that she meets, or just like recontextualizing your own experience, and kind of like, are all these things like, because when you're telling someone something, you always want to look like you were right, and like you were like, you weren't stupid, you just like, that's the way it was, you know what I mean? So there's kind of that, so I was trying to balance like learning about something she knows versus learning about something she isn't familiar with, and kind of balancing those two. And then like in a writerly way, like all of the monsters of the week thematically link to like the memories that she is experiencing.
I think your structure is phenomenal. Because you've set it up in such a way that you can do it. You could do this forever. Side note, that is the funniest outro I think I've ever heard, where you said, "Tell your enemies about my show." That is, I said, that is perfection. I thought, your
Thank
structure, because you build while she's en route to the next
Mhm.
situation.
Mhm.
But let's take a minute, because we're still talking about the Luncheon, and
Mhm.
I want to talk about Elder Rice,
Mhm.
and I don't trust him.
Really? Why?
I don't trust Elder Rice, but at the same time, I go, but why don't I trust him? I don't trust him based on what she's telling me, or what I'm extrapolating from what she's telling me. I feel like he's hiding something, and there are clues that make you say, because she believes him so blindly, that when she repeats, it's one of the few things that you hear her say that isn't shaded to try to make her look like she's in a good light. She speaks about him just like there's implied implicit trust in what she says.
Mhm. She trusts him absolutely. Mhm.
Okay, this dude did something. He blamed it on her, and she has such trust in him that she believes what he told her. She tends to black in and out in terms of her mindset. So for all we know, he did something, and knowing this about, I've gone way down the rabbit hole on this. So, obviously don't tell me.
You have like a
Yeah.
cork board with
Yeah.
like red
That is
string.
exactly what I'm doing. I just know that there's something up with this dude, because he told
Mhm.
her, because on the onset, she says, he told me to listen for when a blackbird says my name, it's time to come home. And I'm like, and then she tells us, well, I don't even know if the blackbirds speak. Maybe he got this wrong. And I'm going, okay, this dude set her up, and he expects her to die in this hut. And he's going to be shocked if she ever makes it back, when she walks through the gate,
Mhm.
assuming they let her in.
Mhm.
There's going to be, those chickens are coming home to roost. At least
Yeah.
is my sense. To the extent that you can do it without spoiling it, what can you tell me about Elder Rice? Why, what is your thoughts around him? How did you come up with this character? Is he a metaphor for something? Because I noticed you use a lot of metaphors and different things,
Mhm.
that you'll allude to, particularly through the villains. And I can't wait till we get to episode 3. I can't wait to talk about Mr. Waterman. But before we get there, this dude seems like he might be a villain in waiting, like a big bad towards the end.
Mhm.
What can you tell me about him that isn't spoilery?
He has a lot of power. He I think there's just like a line about this is not a spoiler because it's a line that she says, I believe is in episode 3, where she's talking about him and she's talking about the kind of charisma he has. And she says, Elder Rice has the most giving, or she says he has the kind of charisma that makes you feel special. Isn't that the most giving kind of charisma? And I feel like that kind of reveals, like, if someone there's a certain type of person that makes people think, I'm giving you all of my attention. You're so special. Like, isn't that a little bit like, so that to me, I felt like that was like a nice little, like, when she says, isn't that the most giving kind of charisma? It's my hope that you listen to that with kind of like, come on, girl. Like, okay. So,
One thing I wanted to talk to you about was her motivation for wanting to leave the hut. And it's what I'm calling the I am here sequence. I'm going to read it. How alone must one have to be? Well, how alone must one be to have to memorialize their existence? So essentially, for those of you that hopefully you've gone and you've listened to it, and now you're back listening to this, she discovers in the hut, I guess this is day 64 as she's about to leave, or 65, in 60-ish days in the hut, where they've left her basically to die. she's, is going up trying to fix the roof, and the rain is coming through the roof. So she goes up to see about it, and there's a carving that her clothing gets snagged on. And then, what's carved is the words, "I am here." And she has this moment where she thinks about, well, who was here before me? Which tells you, okay, this is probably not the first time that an elder has done this to somebody and left them to die. And so she says, well, man, how long, does a person have to be in this hut to memorialize their existence? Are they here somewhere else? And then you have this sequence where I love this. It's, she says, I inhaled, and in that breath, I lived an entire life. And you talked about it a little bit earlier. And you go through this whole thing of where she sees her life pass, where, she's honored in her own mind back in Haven. But meanwhile, she died here in this hut. And that's the motivation that gets her, out and going out into the wilds. I just thought that was very well done. Just a brilliant, sequence, that spurs some motivation. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So that was actually, have you ever read any Shirley Jackson?
No. Sounds like I should, though.
So yeah, she's great. She's great. So actually her voice, a lot of this was inspired heavily by Shirley Jackson. So a lot of this main character's voice, just kind of like she's very strange, right? She's a very strange young woman. She's a very like weird individual who like also experiences very unique situation. And I based a lot of her like in idiosyncrasies on like myself and how I was as a child. And like a lot of me is in this story. Like a lot of her, like the, like just a lot of the ways that she has dealt with things. I believe, episode 3, the story about Thomas?
Yes.
Okay. So that, like those kinds of things, like not in so many words, like not exactly those situations, but like doing something that you deeply regret because you don't want to be the bottom of the totem pole. Like those kinds of things all come from, all of those regrets and all of those feelings and all of that stuff. Like the things that she has gone through as a metaphor are things that I've gone through. So like these were things that I, was pulling from. But anyway, her personality and the way that she speaks and the way that she narrates. One of my favorite books ever is a book by Shirley Jackson called We Have Always Lived in the Castle. And it's just the way that the narrator talks to you is very, very as if she's just telling you something, like as if you're sitting down with her and she's just talking to you about her life. But the way she talks reveals her personality, and her thoughts about things reveal her personality. So everything has editorializing by this main character, right? Like you learn everything and you're like, wow, she either likes that or she doesn't like it. Like that was my goal. And then Haunting of Hill House, the original book, was written by Shirley Jackson. And that moment of her imagining a whole life, I really connected to a moment in this book, Haunting of Hill House, where this character who's lived a very, very sad life, she's cared for her mother her whole life, and her mother dies. And so she's like, I'm going to live my life for myself. And she drives out to Hill House where she's been hired to do something. And she's driving and she sees these stone lions. And as she's driving, and I feel like all of us do this, right? If you're driving, you see like a little house and you're like, what if I lived there? And in your mind, you live this whole life and then you blink and it's over and you're driving and you're still going on. So that's what happens with this character when she sees these stone lions. She imagines that she restores the lions, and like everybody in the town like is very proud of her and her lions, and she cooks she raises fruit in the orchard and like does all this stuff, and then she blinks or whatever. I don't remember what happened specifically, but then that moment's over and she's back to driving to Hill House, and I always connected with that because that's something that I do, and I think a lot of people do, where you can live an entire life in a second and that life is over and you continue on with your regular life. And so in this moment, she imagines this whole life that does not pan out well for her. And she's like, well, I don't want to die in the hut while like the only thing that remains of me is a statue that children throw coins into the pool at her feet. Like that's not and also, there's like small details, right? She's prettier than I am, which is like Haven's way of like making everything better than what it is. And so,
So let me ask you about the passage of time in your world in terms
mhm,
of your world building. Because
mhm,
there are a couple of things that happen that, on the one hand, she knows to the tick. 64
mhm,
days. It took me 5 days to get here. I've been here 60. So, you
mhm,
know, close to 70 days have gone, according to what she's told us, from the time she left to the time she heads back. And then after, I think, her first experience, she's like, I don't know how long I've been gone. And
mhm,
is I'm assuming that's intentional. Is
mhm,
that, but also too, she's recording into a voice recorder, which I'm going to assume that the
mhm,
trader had from, and I love what you did this because, again, we're talking about time. You and you don't get this, and I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I've got the transcript, so I can see what you capitalized versus what, and when you're listening, you're not going to necessarily get that. But you allude to a time called before. And in your transcript, it's
mhm,
capital B. And so I'm like,
mhm,
oh, okay. So there's this whole thing, as you said, post-apocalyptic, that, but we never get what happened. We just know that it was
mhm,
classified as, or characterized as, sinful. Like, okay, that was when the sin
mhm,
happened before. So technology is bad.
mhm,
So I'm assuming that this trader,
mhm,
because I think he had like a couple of rabbits and a can of beans, and he
mhm,
had a voice recorder. And so
mhm,
it's not, I don't think it's ever said that that voice recorder, that technology came from before, but every other piece of technology we see did. So
mhm,
I'm assuming that this recorder she's using came from before. The interesting nugget on this is she's recording it and telling you she's recording it, but because we're experiencing it in what feels like real time, you don't
mhm,
lose the sense of danger. Because in my mind, as I'm listening to this, trying to outsmart you, listening to your story, I'm saying, "Oh,
mhm,
of course, she makes it through because this is a
mhm.
recording she's already done."
But she's
Yeah, she's
telling
telling
us,
us.
yeah.
But the piece that hit me the other day, I was like, "Well, what if she's recording this in real time?" So the
Mm,
threat
mhm,
is right now. Um,
mhm,
so again, I wanted to, like, because again, she flashes back, and you don't know for certain if what she's telling you right now is something she already recorded or something that is being recorded right now. How does time work in your world? Am I really way off on this, or am I onto something?
well, I have you ever seen Over the Garden Wall? Oh, it's very good. It's a cartoon, limited series cartoon. Uh, it's very like Richard Scarry type artwork, or like Wind in the Willows type artwork. It's like that style. One of the actors in it is Elijah Wood. It's basically the story of these two little boys that go missing on Halloween night, and they wake up and they're in the woods, and then they just go on all these adventures, and then and it's very like dreamy. That was kind of the feel I was going for. That like the all of this is a very like surreal, like dreamy, like time. She's confused because time is confusing. Um, and the why, like there's almost like a magical realism kind of element of it, where it's like it's unclear how many days it's been since she's left Haven at after a certain point,
Right,
right? Because at first she's like, it's been 64 days. And then like a couple episodes later, she's like, I don't know how
right.
many days it's been, which is both partly because of the trauma she's experienced, but then also because time is confusing. Like she does the moments that she's dealing with these big bads, how much time has
Mm,
gone by, right? Like at the end of the
yeah,
luncheon, she's like, it's somehow morning. The house is like
yeah,
old now. So it's very like in and out of time. Like it's purposely basically I wanted to capture the feeling of like that very what's the word disorienting feeling of freedom that you get after not having it for a long time.
mm,
So when you have it and you're just kind of like it's like sensory overload and everything's just kind of like floating and wispy and you're just kind of like I don't know how much time is going by. So that's kind of I was I think that if you attempt to like plot everything out like sequentially for and like time out how many days this has been or whatever for the outside of Haven times, it won't line up, and I did that on purpose.
Okay. That makes
Yeah.
sense. That was something I was going to ask you about as well. The sequence with the Constant Sisters, which again, it's I love particularly your edit, and kudos to you. I didn't know that you could that you had the audio editing skills.
Oh, yeah. I've been doing podcasts for years, and so I had mixed my own demos for a while for voiceover, and so I am familiar with knowing how to do that, which is like, thank goodness I knew how to do that stuff because I wanted to be able to create this thing myself and get people to do, Annalise did my music and that was it.
Yeah, and then the rest of it's you. So, I got to tell you, and you've worked on stuff with me, so you know that I'm terrified to do it by myself, which is why I will hire a gajillion voice actors. I will throw sound effects at you, music. My whole thing is I'm going to distract you with ear candy. And hopefully the story's good enough that you don't go, that story sucked, but the ear candy was really good. As hopefully it all kind of works together and it clicks. But what makes it is the actors. You all, it's there are actors like yourself who will come on to a show like that and elevate everybody. Like if I'm doing a scene with you, I know that, but when I get your audio, I'm like, damn it, because now I've got to dig a little bit deeper and say, all right, I've got to match what she's doing. You are able to do this by yourself. And it's not like, it's not like I'm listening to the music and going, well, this is good because of music. And it's not like I'm listening to the story going, well, this is only good because of the story. Because it's that like they complement each other so well. And, I want to get into the Constant Sisters, but talk to me a minute about Annalise and how you were able to, like, had you heard her before? Had you heard her band?
So, okay. So Annalise is a friend who I used to do a improvised like RPG podcast, and it's called Thank You for Questing, and so it was more like not as dark as this story. It's like funny. It's comedic. And we had Annalise do the music for that. And I was like, oh, I always really, Annalise is super professional and turns around tracks really quick. And B, I knew that they were a really talented musician. So then I reached out and was kind of like, okay, I'm thinking of working on this thing. What's the best way for me to like communicate to you what kind of sound I want? Because I was like, I just want something that's like very dreamy and scary and sad. That's the feel I'm going for. And they were like, okay, well, tell me what. And what was great was I would send over my voice tracks only. And it was it was such a, like, we would constantly make each other misty with what we provided. Like, it was like, there's this the moment in, oh wait, you haven't listened to episode 4. Okay, well, there is a moment that occurs in episode 4 that Annalise was like, every time Kelly says that, it makes me cry. And every time I would get Annalise's tracks, I would be like, oh, this, first of all, exactly the look I'm going for, the feel I'm going for. So basically what I did was I sent them the soundtracks that I was listening to while I was writing. And a lot of it was just like weird Lovecraftian music or something like, like a lot of interesting stuff. And every time it was just like, and I would do like certain timestamps for stuff that I was like, okay, at least here I want, the shift to go from like nostalgic, but still kind of, basically everything was like every type of mood you can think of, and then but still creepy. Like everything was like, she's thinking back on like her life in Haven, but there's something wrong. And then so honestly be like, okay, and then send it over, and I was like, this is exactly what I'm going for. The part that always made me if you listen very closely in episode 3, when the hero is being pushed down the aisle, the wedding march, I was like, this is perfect. It was so like, it has some of the notes of like dun 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 dun, but not really, and it's so creepy. And then the moment when everything's on fire, I don't know how Annalise did it, but some of the music sounds like fire, and I was like, that's so cool. So honestly, like, I feel I'm so lucky to have collaborated with them. Like, I'm so proud of the finished product because of how accurately I feel like we understood each other. So it was just like, it was just so wonderful to have that experience.
It's the synergy is perfection. It's undeniable. It's a I mean, to the point where it's inspiring. I think I told you, like, I'm listening to this going, wait a minute, I've had an idea I've been sitting on for about 7 years, and I was like, oh, this is how I'm going to do that. It's I still have to write it, but I now have the vision. Like, I've got the blueprint. Like, okay, this is what that looks like. There's nothing better that I can think of as a creator than when you come up with something that makes somebody else want to go create. And that is what you two have done together in terms of inspiring. So it's again, just the synergy is really good. But let me go back. Let me go back to the Constant Sisters. So now, as you mentioned, we talked about it in terms of the passage of time. And I thought, okay, so you're telling me that when she gets out of this situation, time has passed, clearly, because a house that is pristine when she walks up to it, that has all the little nuances that these old sisters have, and it's creepy, but it's cute. Like you're kind of waiting for a shoe to drop as you're listening to it. Then I don't know, again, this was a case of me again, I was smarting myself. The gray man pops up behind the protagonist, and they go in, and the gray man has the typewriter, and it's a creepy typewriter that types out things, which I thought was so well done, because she types hello, and instead of goodbye, which is what you would think it would type by itself, it says good night. All the lights go out, and I'm like, it was in that moment when I was listening to it, I was like, okay, this is creepy. And yeah,
everyone is so creeped out by the good night moment.
I got creeped out, and I said, okay, I'm hooked now, and I'm terrified, and I'm not a dude that really does scary. Like, scary freaks me out, but I was scared, but like peeking, wanting to see, what happens next. Yeah. I've read, I've listened. I still don't entirely grasp what exactly happened in that scene, and what exactly happened. Is that sister who doesn't have the face, who is revealed in the mirror, and I'm assuming it's a sister. Was this a third sister, or did the mirror sort of, because this is where I went away from time and took the mirror and said, okay, this must be a metaphor because by the time we are introduced to this person, the Constant Sisters are dead. Everything has everything flipped. You've got this person who doesn't have a face, who reveals this when we see their reflection in a mirror. And she, so you've got the gray man who says, all right, I'm holding something that we think is a bone, but it turns out to be a blade. And the way that they are buried in a coffin that is built for two, and the way that you had them put together, implies that one killed the other. And so I'm like, wait a minute, were there 4 sisters? Are these the Constant Sisters on the other side of this mirror, which represents the passage of time? And the protagonist sort of just tells you, yeah, this is what happened. Now everything is old and everything is different. And now I'm going to keep on going back to Haven. This is creepy out here. I'm going back to Haven. And it's so well done because I've gone back and I'm like, okay, I must have missed something. Let me go back. I've listened, I've read, and it's like it's intentionally vague because it's like you know, the more information you get, the more questions you have. Which is, I could listen to this a million times and still kind of be like, okay, wait, this is what I think went down. Did I miss it or was that intentional?
Okay, you got like 70% of it. So the reason that you as a listener / reader don't know like exactly what occurred is because the main character does not understand what happened. So basically what happened is those two sisters have been dead long before. So they're dead. So when she comes to the house itself is a ghost of itself. And when she arrives, she sees it as the ghosts, you know, remember themselves being, right? Like they're doing their routine. They're like these two sisters that are just inseparable. They're exactly the same. They talk over each other. Now, the gray man, this is just like in my own heart and isn't necessarily like something that people, you know, would get because I did not reveal this. But the gray man's deal is that he uses that typewriter to help ghosts cross over. So he communicates with them. So he puts it down and then it communicates with the other side. And so once he puts it out and she types hello, it kind of sets the haunting in motion. So when they go upstairs, they see the sister with the caved in face, right? So we're seeing like duality here, where it's like the sisters as they would like to remember themselves and the sisters as they are. So the sisters as they are as ghosts is forever haunted. And so we see the sister that has the caved in face, like she got that from falling down the stairs, which we then find her body. And it has to be buried. And her saying, I'm sorry, is because she stabbed her sister. And so they had gotten in some, you know, some tiff or whatever, which ended in one murdering the other. And to put them to rest is to put them together in the coffin that they had made so that they could be buried next to each other. And then put them to rest forever. And so that like that story is kind of about like forgiveness and like blame and doing something to somebody and regretting it and being the recipient of trauma and how do you get over that kind of thing.
Man, that was keeping me up at night in the best type of way. I was like, man, what happened? So I feel so much better now that I know what went down. Kelly, phenomenal inaugural episode. So let's keep going. Let's talk now about the museum.
Okay.
There's a lot going on at the museum. But before we even get to the museum, we start out, she sort of flashes back at the top of these episodes, gives you a little bit of world building history, and then we move to present day. So at the onset, we're talking about Elder Rice again and in his creepy butt. But what's significant and what I want to ask you about is she finds this coin, this currency that is from this space that you are calling before. So this pre-apocalypse situation. She's always finding things, either technology or just different things she's encountering.
Talk to me about that sequence where she finds this coin and how the elders say, well, we've got to take things from before. You know, and what's going on there? Why are they hiding their history?
Yeah. So basically, like in my mind, the elders are looking at Haven as like a new start, right? Like they're like, this is we are making this place to be a safe place. It's called Haven, because you know people from before they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, and now look what happened to them, right? They're all that's left of them is a ruined dome and a coin in the woods. Like we can control that. We can make sure that we're safe, and so we're going to set the rules for this culture, basically this like microculture. And so her having the coin, finding the coin, and deciding to show it to him kind of shows you that she trusts him. She thinks that he'll keep her secret. She even says, right, she's like, I didn't say, but I hoped that he would say that he could just let me have it. And also it's a coin, right? Who cares? Who cares if she keeps this coin? And yet the rules are such, and he enacts the rules as such, that, yeah, but you can't keep that coin. You know what? I'll hold on to it for you.
Right.
And then maybe, you can have it back. And that right there, right? That's exercising control over something that ultimately doesn't matter. Who cares if she has this coin? But he cares and she cares. And him like saying to her, right? Like, you know what? I've got to pass this coin to them. Like kind of being like, I'm going to take it away. No, I won't, but I'm going to keep it and I'm going to decide if you have it back again. Like that right there is the, I hope, kind of like leaves a little bit of like, like, what is this Haven situation? You know what I mean? And like, what is his situation?
I get the sense that all the elders are men in Haven.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's really, and they're all chaste men.
Yes.
Something went down between this elder and her, or this elder and the mom. She obviously remembers that something happened to her mother. But if Elder Rice had something to do with it, he's either convinced her that she did, or she's convinced herself that she didn't, even that he didn't have anything to do with it, even though she knows he did. Again, you haven't, I haven't gotten that far yet. I'm just letting you know how my mind is, is working into that.
Yeah.
So then we flash back into, to current time, and her journey takes us to a museum.
And the museum is creepy. I'm not going to lie, it creeped me out. It's still one of my favorite scenes in this entire series that I've heard so far. It sort of reminds me of like a old kung fu movie where the hero has to go through all of these different boss levels, room by room, as they work their way, through this encounter. You've got the baby room, which is incredibly creepy. And then you've got the room where the hunters are hunting stuffed animals. And then we come upon the curator, which kind of reminds me of the architect scene in The Matrix a little bit, where you sort of meet this person that's made this thing and you have this discussion, with that. Brilliantly done. But what I am really intrigued the most by is your decision to make it impassable. She could not get around this situation. Talk to me about that decision and why you wrote it in such a way that the only way out for her was through.
Well, so there's the like logistical thing, right? Like she has to go in there. And after what she just experienced, she does not want to go in anywhere else, right? So there's kind of the whole like, well, she's got to get in there. And then there's also the idea that she has to experience this phase of learning about herself. And kind of if you don't take this step, you won't learn anything about yourself and you'll just be stuck and you'll never get to where you want to go. So there's like a logistical side of it, which I was
gotta
like,
get her in there, right?
And then yeah. And I was like, well, I'll just make it so she can't not.
Right.
And then there's also the idea of like, you have to take this step. You have to do it. Like it's going to suck and it's going to be scary. It sucks to look at yourself in an unsavory light. It does, but you have to do it if you want to progress. So that kind of was because also, everybody that's in that museum, all the exhibits, right? Like they have exactly what they think they want. And I think this moment to me was the beginning of what did this character think she wanted and what does she really want and how do those diverge? And what happens to you if you get what you think you want, which is what ends up happening to those people.
It is, you've touched on all the things that I definitely wanted to get into. At this point I realized, and I was,
there's a lot of innuendo in the museum, which is brilliant. You put questions out there, and I love this. It's both for the protagonist as well as the listener, because the things she is asked make you think as a listener. when the protagonist sees a sign that says, "What do you want?" I start to think about, well, what do I want? And we really get more immersed into the story because of this. And you see this theme sort of become a thread throughout each room that she goes into. When we go into the baby room and you have the mannequin that comes to life, it's this sort of odd, I'm not even sure what to call it, but it's this thing where you've got a mannequin, which is a living adult doll who is distraught because she doesn't want to know that the doll that she has, which is sort of a Raggedy Ann-ish doll, isn't alive. And I'm looking at this going, well, neither are you, right? So then she goes from there to these hunters who are hunting for food, and they have no idea that every single animal that they're going to kill is stuffed. So we get into this overarching thought around, well, what do you want? What do they want? They want to eat. What does the mannequin want? The mannequin wants her baby to be alive, but hasn't accepted the fact that she's not. So there's all of this. It's like layer upon layer. It's like a Russian doll of things, there in terms of the layers of exploring what anybody wants. Talk to me about that, the hunters hunting for things, for food that is stuffed, and, all of this innuendo in this messaging.
Well, so the curator basically communicates to the narrator that, like, the first room is her mother. The second room are these people that, probably bullied her or something. And she's basically a vengeful sea witch person, right? She lives in this hut on this scary beach and basically controls, can create a room in the museum for you, right? As she does for the narrator. And so it's not clear if the woman, the first, the baby room, if she's supposed to be, if she's just a fake mannequin, or if she's a real lady that is sometimes comes to life if you turn on the thing. It's supposed to be kind of, nebulous. But the idea with that is the first one is, I'd rather live a lie than go through understanding the truth. Right. So yeah. So she would rather, right? She would rather just be in this cycle with this fake baby that's going to stay a baby forever, because that's kind of what the main, the sea witch lady, that her mother was too smothering. Right. So she's fine, you're too smothering. I'll give you a baby that's a baby forever. And she would rather have this fake baby and go through this lie that her whole life is a lie, and everyone knows it and she knows it. But she'd rather keep living that than face the truth, which is that her daughter doesn't want her to be treated that way. So there's that. And then the second one is kind of we're so obsessed with the hunt of hurting you, and the hunger is what drives us. So fine, I'll give you hunger all the time, and that's all you'll have. And kind of when, in the moment when she, when the main character is in her own room that the woman creates for her, where she sees her mother, and her mother is she's oh, this isn't real. And the mother says, yeah, but you'll forget that, kind of all other people. And she says oh, that's a beautiful promise. But she knows that. And then in that moment, she's is this what my life would be? That I would be having everything what I want, and other people will be looking at my life from the outside and feeling sick, because she sees those people and she's I cannot be like that. And that's kind of what pushes her to keep going, because she's it's really scary for me. I thought I was going back because I wanted things to go back to normal. They can't. My mom's dead. I've been exiled. That's just not going to happen. So now I'm going back. Why? She's not sure, but kind of nefarious tinklings are happening in her head at this point. So she kind of sees this is the act out of the I am here moment, where she's that could be me. That disgusts me. I feel sick looking at that. I don't want my life to be like that. So I have to do the scary thing and I have to keep going.
It's man, again, I love your lines. There's a couple things where even the rooms that she's in come to life. Where I think you have a line with a room size, and
Yeah.
even the room tilts. It's almost like the room tilts its head and looks at you
Oh,
like,
yeah.
is that really what you want?
Yeah.
I love your line where you write, where the curator says, when people get, and you said it earlier, when people get what they want, the goal is accomplished. Then what is there to live for? The again, she answers everything with a question. She's very Socratic, in that she's like, well, could they? Can people change? She talks about her mother loves her too much. Explains about the people that were hunting, and again, and that was just, some cruelty. And as you put it, she was like, well, should you? And it's the first time that we asked the question, well, should she go back, to this? And it gets us, as you mentioned, thinking about it. And you see that her level up, in this moment, and her saying, yeah, I don't want this. But there's a great line that you put where she says, I don't want to change. She said, tasting the lie, which tells you, yes, she does. But you get the sense that, and it's so well done because you want to get the sense because these are episodes. So you want to have that sense that because we're living this out through her eyes, we're achieving, through her. And so when she levels up, so do we, as listeners. And there's an endorphin sort of satisfaction that we grew too. And so it helps us root for her, but it's her authenticity that grounds her, that makes you say, wow, that's the hook, because she levels up because she grew, but you still have a ways to go because she's admitting to you, I'm lying. And that keeps me wanting to come back to get to, more of what goes on with her. It's the way you set all that up structurally is really brilliant. It's really well done.
Well, there's also in the so in the first conversation that she has with the curator, the curator's like, once you get the thing you want, what is there to live for? And then she asks the question, couldn't you want something different? Can't people change? And then she goes into that room, and then when she comes out of the room, the curator asks her, like the questions that she was asking the curator. So the curator asks her, couldn't you want something different? So I do a lot of in my writing, I like to do a lot of like duality, or like asking the same question twice and having it asked to you, and realizing like, oh, I guess I should be following my own advice kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely caught that. And there's so much in there, and it just builds, to the point where by the time I got through episode 2, I think the first, I finished episode 2 like in the same day that episode 3 dropped. And so, I'm able to binge, and go into it. And 3 is, the repentance is so rich that it's the up to that point, it's the longest episode. It's about, I would say it's about 40 minutes. And you can't really, you have to spoon feed through that, because there's a lot going on in this particular episode. I don't have a favorite, but the Thomas scene might be putting this one in the lead. And we talked about it earlier, alluded to it, and I've been talking. I didn't want to just rush to it because it's a scene that I wanted to really unpack because it's brilliant. And again, for those of you who are listening to this, if you have not listened to episode 3, go and listen to that, and then come back and listen to this, because you need to hear it the way that Kelly does it. It's really amazing. She talks about a boy named neighbor Samson's son, Thomas. and
Mhm.
he's, going out. He's got this pail that he's going to get water in, and what's so brilliant about the scene, and I want to step through it, is that it picks at something that every single person that hears this story probably has done or has done to
Mhm.
them. And
Mhm.
it's one of those things where the protagonist there is no comeuppance. It has none of the things that you would say in a story have to happen
Mhm.
for the good guys to win. And that's like
Mhm.
storytelling 101. Like, no. The hero wins. And it's one of those moments where you go,
Mhm.
wow, are there any heroes, in this? Because essentially what goes down is, she sees Thomas walk up. Now, at this point, I think in this flashback sequence, the protagonist is about 12 years old. And she talks about
Mhm.
how she used to collect these beautiful rocks, and Thomas
Mhm.
walks up and you get a sense of what he's like through her description, you know, um, and she says, and it's such a good line. She goes, I felt a little disgusted watching him struggle. And I missed it the first
Mhm.
time I listened to it, and I caught it as I was prepping to talk to you, right now. And I said, wow, man, that line is so powerful. It's so raw because it speaks to how we as human beings like to stand on the shoulders of others on some subconscious level.
Mhm.
And I think everybody at some point has looked at somebody and said, I just told you about it earlier. I'm judging bass players from the audience. I can smoke him. Right?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm. Mhm.
it speaks to the villain that lives inside of all of us. And I can think of times, because essentially what happens in this scene is Thomas comes up, we see him through her eyes. She's a little disgusted by him until he compliments her rock collection. And now she's like, well, okay, well,
Mhm.
now I kind of like you because no one's ever said anything nice about my rocks before. So I feel quite pleased. I was disgusted by you a second ago, but now
Mhm.
that you've stroked my ego, I like you. Now,
Mhm.
we're cool so long as nobody's around to judge me by my
Mhm.
association with you. Right? I'll gladly take on your
Mhm.
praise, but not the association, because people might look at me with disgust if I'm here with you and you're over there
Mhm.
struggling. And so my mind, as I'm reading this and as I'm listening to this, flashes back to college, where I had a moment,
Mhm.
not quite as violent as this ends up being, but a moment where I was on campus my first week at University of Maryland, and nobody had moved in
Mhm.
yet. I was one of the first ones to move on the campus, and made an acquaintance. And we're hanging out for about a week, and then he was not much unlike this guy, Thomas, and all
Mhm.
my buddies, that I had either known or knew were coming to campus. They move in, and I'm having this same moment of, well, I don't want to be, I'm good with you until my buddies come, but
Mhm.
now that my buddies here, and it never comes
Mhm.
out. But this story reminded me of one of my worst moments, where I kind of distanced myself. I kind of threw a proverbial
Mhm.
rock and just stopped being
Mhm.
available, because no, I don't, come
Mhm.
around and hey, what's up? And I keep it moving. It's the same type of thing.
Mhm.
And it spoke to a place. And I was like, geez, I haven't thought about this. I was 18, doing that. I hadn't thought about that since that
Mhm.
time. And it took me to a place where it's like, no one gets to be innocent in them. And as you're listening to her describe, and so for those of you who have listened to it or coming back or may have not listened to this, and we warned you that there were spoilers. These bullies come up, and I love how you describe the bullies. How you got one that's sort of tall, and I imagine he's lanky, and then you have somebody that you
Mhm.
describe that she has really big teeth. So your
Mhm.
your bullies come up, and they got their own issues, and the way that they dealing with them is they pick on, as is typical with bullies, you pick on other folks. And Thomas just wants to get his
Mhm.
water and keep it moving. That's all he wants to do.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
gets kicked over by this tall kid. The girl with the big teeth, I guess, is laughing at him. And here's this moment where our protagonist gets to be heroic. There's an opportunity to take up for Thomas, which is what I'm fully
Mhm.
expecting. And she hits the kid in the jaw with one of the rocks he just complimented. And kid runs
Mhm.
off. He's got mud on his butt. He runs off. And then the next thing you know, nobody hears from this kid again. The elder Samson, or I forget his name, Samson, what'd you call him? Neighbor Samson, ends up having another kid with that they laud for being strong. And even the protagonist is like, I thought about Thomas a little bit, but then I eventually forgot about him. And there's
Mhm.
nobody gets got. The villain, no villain
Mhm.
gets any moment of comeuppance, and there isn't even a moment of really regret. She just kind of says, I did a thing and then I forgot about it
Mhm.
and I moved on.
Mhm.
It's so powerful because of where it takes your mind
Mhm.
to as you're listening to it. What it doesn't, the payoff is the fact that it doesn't pay off. And I've never seen that
Mhm.
in anything that I've read, where you're waiting
Mhm.
for it. It doesn't give you what you expect from just structure, and that's the payoff. Talk to me about this brilliant scene and how it's a brave scene to write, because
Oh, thank you.
because in order to write that, you either had to experience that or you had to have done that. And it's
Mhm.
a nobody wants to relive that particular moment. It was hard for me I debated whether or not I was going to share that with you when we got to this scene. I was like, do I just pretend that I didn't do
Yeah.
that in college? It's
Yeah.
that's the tug of war that scene pulls out of you. It forces you to face a black mirror. So talk to me about that. It's brilliant. But tell me about that
Sure.
scene.
So, you know how like they always say you'd have to have a save the
Yeah.
cat moment for your heroes? I chose to do a kill the cat moment
Wow.
where basically she well, because I wanted to show so of course, right, when she's telling you this story, she of course in her heart regrets what she did, right? Because and we know that not because she's telling you that she regretted it, but that she said um that she heard the sound of the rock hitting his face as she would fall
Mm.
asleep. But then eventually she didn't hear it at all, which basically like we know through context that like if you're remembering the sound of a rock that you threw hitting a kid's face every night as you fall asleep, I think it's just kind of like the idea of like how time, like how do I put this, like moments like that, they only exist because we talk about
Mm.
them. And so like moments that you have done something so terrible, and also because she's a product of the place that she's been, the place that she's been brought up. Because there's this line at the beginning where she says like, yeah, the kids, they kind of like, picked on me a little bit, but not like they did to Thomas, because I was a strange girl, yes, but he was a weak boy, which was a crime far greater, which I think is like a comment on like
Yeah.
toxic masculinity and like about him being weak, which is not something he can help. And yet that's something that everyone's going to glom onto, because that then they can say like, well, I'm not him,
Right. Yeah.
which she does. Because in that moment, right, the bully looks at her and there's a moment where she has to decide what she's going to do. And she picks up the rock and she throws it. And even as she's throwing it, you don't know where it's going to hit. And you think, oh, maybe she's throwing it at
Yes.
the mean boy. But she doesn't. She throws it at Thomas. And then it's just like, I mean, the Thomas scene is maybe the saddest thing I've ever written. It's like this kid, like he keeps trying to get up and he keeps falling into the mud puddle. And it's also kind of the it's a comment on,
Oh, it's a comment on
right,
everything.
because
Yeah.
yeah, like, well, he does the thing that his parents kind of wished he would do, which is just disappear into the woods, because they look at their son and they're like, you're not we're not proud of you, and we kind of wish you would just
He
disappear. And
does.
he does. And they only look for a day. That's what when she's like, and
Hold
we
it.
looked for a whole day. I was like, they searched for a day. They search for a day. And she even says, although I suspect not very hard. And then he disappears into the woods. And, the line where he's like, or where she says, and they were much happier than they had been before their first try disappeared into the woods. So it's kind of like, they tried, and they look at their son not as a person, but
As an attempt. Yeah.
as an opportunity. Yeah, as an attempt at something that didn't work out. And so they're like, oh, and you can kind of tell, right? Like in the moment that she sees his mother and she's putting his stuff away in the shed, and her visceral reaction of it, right? She tastes bile and she runs away and she slams the door. So she does feel like, I am responsible for this, which, like, yes, she is responsible, but it's also a culmination of like how everybody in the town has treated this little boy. And so I think as she's telling it, right, she's not going out so far as to be like, I felt bad about it, I regret it, right? But instead, she's explaining to you, that she thought about it every night and then just didn't, because that's what happens, right? Like that's what happened with you. You stopped thinking about that. And that's what happens. Like something which is the worst moment in somebody's life, the other people involved stop thinking about. Like that. So that's kind of what I was going for.
It hits home. It hits different. It really does hit different. It's like I said, I hadn't thought of that in a long time. I'm not gonna say how old I am, but I hadn't thought about it in a long time.
Yeah.
It forced me to look at it and say, because in that same moment that you're not thinking about it and you're ready to put yourself up on that internal pedestal of, well, I would never do that. And, your self-conscious kind of pops up and says, except for that time where you did do that, you just didn't throw a rock at anybody.
Yeah.
And it's the Black Mirror of Black Mirrors, because there's so many things that you're speaking to, because I don't think in that scene, there's not a single person that's safe. And the brilliance of it is when you kill a cat like that, and I love that term, as opposed to saving the cat, you show us an authentic dark moment with this protagonist, but because we've all been her at some point, you can't root against her, because to root against her now is to root against yourself, if you're being honest.
Yeah. Because when you look, my goal is that like when you hear that scene, is to kind of just be like, yeah, that sucks. Like not like how could she do that, right? Because like we've all, so I don't know. I think whenever I write characters, I always try to make them as real as possible. And like even someone that you're supposed to be rooting for, how could you say that somebody has never done something they regret ever? So that's, one of her moments that she regrets. But that doesn't mean that she doesn't, she's flawed. She's very flawed. She's naive. She's indoctrinated. She's selfish. She's impetuous. She's many things, but still a person. So that's kind of what I was going for.
She's so three-dimensional, and she makes you see yourself. And these are the flawed, heroes are the best type. It's at this point that I'm, as I'm, I've dug in, that I'm thinking, oh man, she's only written 6 of these. Is the thought of, can I talk her into making more of these? Can it?
Yeah. Well, I already have ideas for 2 other things I want to do, but they're not related to this universe.
So this is this. You're gonna. It's sounding like this has a defined end, and there's no okay.
It ends.
Then that's.
And it ends this week.
Oh, geez. Wait a minute. Is this are you putting 2 out at the same time? Got you.
They're shorter.
Okay.
So one's going to come out midnight, one's going to come out noon.
I wasn't ready, for all of that. Yeah, I was really not ready. Okay. That tells me what I got to get my mind right, get focused. Man, this is so good. Okay, so the interesting, this is the first time you've done. Actually, no, it's not, because you did a little bit of this in episode 2. You get this flashback to when she's 12. And then we sort of, jump forward to her. We get a little bit more of a clue of her remembering, the moment her mother died. which is
Mhm.
an interesting choice to segue from this gut-wrenching
Mhm.
scene with Thomas that sort of just passes by. And it in a
Mhm.
way, she does get comeuppance in a sense, but it's too much comeuppance for like it doesn't fit. Like, oh man, I can't even say that she should, not this. No, okay, she hit
Yeah.
the kid with a rock, and that sucks. But now I'm watching, her mom die, and so now I feel bad for her, which feels weird because a second ago I was like, well, that's terrible, and now I feel like she didn't deserve
Mhm.
this. I'm assuming that's on
Mhm.
purpose.
Well, because life doesn't even out. Just things happen.
It's very, very real. And to your point, it's a life doesn't even out except in our stories, and you're not
Mhm.
letting us have that, which is the brilliance of
Mm-mm.
this work, is that um it's like, no, my payoff to you
Yeah.
is more real, is more darkness. I love too how you repeated I held her to me. I held her to me. And you do that a few
Mhm.
times. I think it's you do it with
Mhm.
the mannequin holding the dolly, don't tell me.
Mhm.
And then you
Mhm.
flip it here
Mhm.
and do that callback to the in this scene. And then we get a little bit more clue about Elder Rice, and a little bit more of,
Mhm.
okay, this dude is still creepy. He's still a little bit, a little bit shady. He just
Yeah,
kind of
he's kinda
pops up
shady.
at the jail. He's giving her the water, and he says, well, you didn't know what you were doing. Which at this point, I'm like, you're shady. So I'm waiting for him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
your
I'm waiting for
hackles
him
are
to
a
get
little up.
his. At this point,
Mhm.
and so we get all of that, and then we flash to the what is present time, what we assume to be present time, and then we get into this. Now she's talking about, like, I don't know how many days it's been, but also I've leveled up. Weeks ago I would have been scared.
Mhm.
Now I'm not so scared because I've been out here in the wild, and it's perfect timing for that because we see her arrive upon this town. And and
Mhm.
so what's interesting about this is the I'm assuming that as the writer that the listener's saying, "Oh, I got Kelly's pattern down now. I know it. Okay, so we get flashback. Okay, now we're gonna get some creepy.
Mhm.
She's not gonna
Mhm.
she's not gonna shock me this time. It's kind of my I kind of know
Mhm.
what to expect. Okay, we can get a villain of the
Mhm.
week, and but yeah, this town messed me up. This entire thing
Yeah.
messed me up. Yeah,
This episode has the saddest and grossest things I've
yeah,
ever written.
yeah.
It's very gross. Like, as I was writing it, I didn't eat all day, and I was like, "Why am I not hungry?" Because it's
Yeah,
so
this
disgusting.
the I love your setup. We start out at a saloon, and you kind of give us a clue at this point, with the random person. And I love how you do sort of these Batman style disappearances. Like a character will be there, and then you turn around and they weren't there anymore. Because that's just
Yeah.
also adds to the creep factor of the whole thing.
Mhm.
Person kind of sitting there. I'm assuming in my mind's eye, I see a rocking chair just kind of hanging out and by themselves. There's tumbleweeds or what have you. And hey, you're looking for
Yeah.
PD. PD, no, PD's gone, and so is Rose. And and in your mind, you kind of think, okay, this is a creepy. You're so fixated on the creepy person sitting out that you don't know that this person is just giving you clues, about some things that are going
Mhm.
on. Until such time as our protagonist spots this mansion, and I'm wondering, and it's Mr. Waterman's mansion, which you call an imposing white house. And I'm wondering,
Oh.
was that intentional?
I actually didn't even that was I mean, maybe subconsciously, I did not. It's also really funny because one of my very good friends, his last name is Rice, and I was like I texted him, like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, "I just realized that Elder Rice." I was like, "This is not intentional." He's like, "I don't care." He was like, "I'm gonna tell people it's intentional." I was like, "You don't want that."
Oh
So,
man.
it was unintentional. I think it was just like no, I was imagining just this like white monolith like scraping at the sky at this like parched earth town. That's kind of what I was picturing. But I mean, Mr. Waterman does represent white men in power. So that's kind of what I was going for, which I think there's like a part where she's sitting in the chair across from him and she's like, he is this guy that's got this beautiful house full of dead animals because there's taxidermy everywhere. And she's like, and clean nails and a nice suit. And I'm this girl with a pack on my knee and I'm dirty. And one of us is making incorrect assumptions about the other. And I wanted to change that. She doesn't realize that she's making an incorrect assumption about him.
Again, it's the Mr. Waterman character. There was I didn't catch it on the listen, but again, I'm reading too. And so when I saw this, I said, okay, imposing White House, tall black double doors. And I said, man, there's a lot going on there that potentially if she meant it, in that, and you just broke that down. And you see her confidence because she's hesitant to go into the Constant Sisters' home. She's looking for a way around this impassable museum. And when she gets here, she says, oh, I'm going to speak to this dude. I would speak with Mr. Waterman. It's like, oh, okay.
She tries to force her way in there past the butler who's telling her, do you not understand?
I'm trying to, Peterson's trying to tell her, don't do it. And I love, again, at this point, her bravery makes her a bit naive, to what's going on. And so she comes in, and it's interesting because, okay, so now I know Waterman, and it makes sense because the white theme, the White House, he's white haired, he's wearing all white. And I thought he was metaphorical for God because of the line where he says,
interesting.
Peterson, closed the door because you're letting the devil's breath in. And I said, okay, all white, this is, and him pronouncing salvation over her without her having a choice. So there's a number of things metaphorically that you could see within this character. That
he
exactly.
Sees himself as God,
so now I see that. Okay, so it's definitely that. What I thought was really interesting about the taxidermy scene is that you tell us in the lines that they were all killed in a cowardly. They were killed in their sleep. Murdered in this cowardly way, and now he poses them in these menacing poses to give the illusion that he's stronger than what he is.
And to give the illusion that he's stronger than what he dominated. He waited until they were at their weakest and killed them. And then it's kind of, the idea of people in power rewriting history.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. I find it interesting too that, everything outside of his house was hot. Everything inside is there's a line where she says, the sweat on my face felt cold, and she shivers. So everything inside is cold. Everything outside is hot at the moment, right? Because it will flip, here in short order.
Yeah.
He even says to her, you look like you've come a long way. What's interesting about this between, this boss, I'm kind of looking at them as like video game bosses. So the last boss was a curator, and the curator's asking her questions that are statements, that designed to help her level up and to pull things. I feel like the curator helps her more than anything, even though she's kind of got some creepy stuff going on. This dude isn't asking her anything. He's telling her,
no,
you look like you've come from a long way. You look like you did something sinful, and it's constantly nipping at your heels no matter how far you run. And she was saying, he said it like he knew me, so now she's just the latest animal that he's ready to stuff.
Yeah.
Very powerful, scene. It's just, interesting. And then it took me a minute to figure it out, but the people that were missing from the town, Peter's son, and Rose, I thought for a minute, through first listen, I'm going, okay, did he turn them into robots? Were they always robots? And then you realize that no, he captures them and then kind of screws them into, in place to where they're kind of wheeling around, his house. Tell me, like, how'd you come up with this? Did you eat late? Like what was going on?
I literally I was just like, what would be scary? Like, what is a way that someone can exercise control over you? Like, exercise the most control over you in a way that's very scary. And it's in a way that you are completely cognizant of what's occurring. And so he's physically controlling them, right? Because like their wrists are controlled by strings, and like they're moved around the house on these platforms, and the wires go into the ceiling, and he's controlling everything with that little book that he has in his lap. And so it's in my mind. So basically, these are people from the town, right? And this is a saloon owner, a brothel owner, a card shark, right? Like these are all people that are doing things that Mr. Waterman deems as morally wrong. And so he's creating his perfect world in this house where he takes these people and forces them to do the roles that he thinks are proper. And when he looks at our main character, there are two roles that she can fill. She can be someone's daughter, or she can be someone's wife. And he says, you're too young, you're too old to be Rose's daughter. So he has mother, daughter, or wife. And that's the only thing she can be. And so he's like, well, you're too young to be, or too old to be Rose's daughter. So maybe it's time Isaiah took a wife. Isaiah Garrison is the card shark that gets taken. So he's kind of he is God in this house. He's created this whole world of like what he thinks is proper. And this again, right? Like so many of these are her being like, oh, this is the end of the road if I keep going down this way, because there's so much control happening in Haven. So much. And the fact that they share a religion, and the fact that it's like she sees this as like the extension of what Haven could be, or maybe just as a metaphor of what happens in Haven, where everyone, you know your role when you're in Haven. In this house, you know your role because you are given it. So it's kind of like she's seeing this and is like, oh, I mean, A, I need to get out. Right. B, like this subconsciously, I'm realizing this is more similar to Haven than I realized. So when at the end of this episode, she's not like, I can't wait to get home to Haven to be safe. Like she's just like, I got to get back there. I don't know why, but I have to get back.
Yeah, no, it's man, again, I'm focusing on your hotlines, in this, there's I love the line where he says, well, it's only when he struggles that he bleeds. When Peterson is struggling, he says another line that I loved where he said, I must decide where you go. There's so much that you could unpack from the things that Waterman, is saying. Then that whole scene where she's dragged around, that is just creepy, and it just between that and the music, that comes in at that point. The line that Rose says where, it would be so much easier for you if you just let it happen, if you just let this control wash over you. That made me think back to Haven where she did that. And so it's certainly not that. Your choices here, in terms of what you write, they just fit really, really well. And they evoke things. Oh, you're welcome. It's, again, and I know I sound like a broken record, but it's so well done, the way that you broke it down. I found it interesting too, that you mentioned that the walls were covered with these enormous paintings, and each one of them have, these names: the Creator's Test, Temptation, Repentance, Exaltation, and then, interestingly enough, her failure. So, is that what came to mind for me? Because then, and this is the advantage of having the transcript. I'm looking at these moments that she talks about, and I highlight them. Highlight them. The repentance, the woman, the creator, the divine message, his grace, and exaltation. So that follows the paintings, and these are things that kind of leaped out that you, partly because you capitalized them, and so I get to cheat a little bit. Why her failure and his grace? Is that on purpose? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's gendered religion. So it's, the men, watermen, he has the power. And so like, it's kind of like some, obviously unnamed, but some in their mythos, some woman in the past messed up and had to repent to the creator, and he would dole out forgiveness. And I think that is just like the structure of the religion, and religion informs culture. So it was kind of, it's kind of supposed to show you a little bit of like question marks about like the power dynamics in Haven, and like, how, and also inform you of the narrator's take on them, right? Because she's like, look, I don't even care about getting basically raptured. Yeah. She's like, if it means I don't have to get crows pecking at my back, I'm fine not taking the, like, basically she, like the whole, what I was trying to get at was like the idea that people have of like, well, you need to suffer in order to deserve to get something. And it's like, well, then I don't want the thing. Like if you're telling me I have to suffer in order to get this thing, like then skip. I don't want it. But the general idea in this town, or I guess people that follow this religion, which I think like maybe, different towns have different takes on different things, but at least in the religion that she shares with him, and therefore in her culture in Haven, that's the idea, right? Like you have to suffer, you have to, in order to get some hint, in order to get the promise of exaltation. Not even to get exaltation, but to get the promise of exaltation. So there's a lot of like people dangling certain things people in power dangling certain things to get people that don't have power to do what they want.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It obviously takes me back to thinking about Genesis 3, the garden. And I've heard this preached a couple of different ways. The most interesting one is that that speaks to, because you alluded to it, that someone, the way in the mythos, a woman messes up and therefore it messes up for everybody. I heard a preacher say one time that it's a misnomer that Eve was alone.
Yeah, they were
not alone.
She's not
Dude
alone.
He's right there. The entire
time.
He's
right there. And he's like, yeah,
because he has to be, again, it never actually says that it's an apple, but he had to be in close proximity. So if you think about it, what's really interesting about that chapter is a couple of things. The whole thing is interesting, but what stands out, and what's always stood out to me in that is, one, it didn't surprise anybody that the serpent could speak. One, that Satan chose a serpent because he's like, oh, it's the smartest of all these creatures that are here in the garden. And nobody's surprised that this thing is talking, which tells me like, all right, were they talking? Were they, it's like the blackbirds, are they always talking? It's, two, it's interesting to me that I don't think for a second that if I'm meeting you for the first time, and I've had this relationship with the creator where, I'm here because this dude made me and I don't know you, and you roll up on me talking about eat from the tree I was told not to eat from. Man, I don't know you. I don't know you.
Yeah.
Step, get away from me. But if I've known you for about a year, 2 years, and we've had conversations, we've laughed, and we've kicked a little bit, man, I trust you. If I'm Eve, my husband knows you. I know you. You come around all the time. You're the serpent that comes around that talks to us. Shoot, man, and there's just enough truth in there for it to be believable. What's interesting is that the serpent actually doesn't lie to them. He's says, you will be like God, knowing good from evil, which is exactly what happened. He just didn't tell them the other pieces of it that would come from it. I also found it always interesting that the curse of the serpent was that it would slither, which tells me that, well, maybe it was walking around upright the entire time. Just interesting. When this is what it invoked, what this scene made me think of was Genesis 3 and the misnomer that people have about it, that Eve was just all chilling, gets deceived, Adam has nothing to do with it, when in fact he was right there. And in fact, it's one of the most cowardly moments that you ever see throughout scripture, where God says, man, what happened? He's like, well, it's this woman that you gave me.
He throws her under the bus.
There's the first bus throw ever recorded in the history of anything.
Yeah.
And hence the curse on the ground, and the curse of, pain through childbirth, all the things that come as a result of, this situation. As you put it, it's recorded a certain way, as it went down, but people take away from it what they want. And as you mentioned, control of a narrative by saying, well, it wasn't me. It was, the bus throw has continued throughout time. So this is what that, this scene made me think of.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of just like all about who's telling the story. Right. So that's kind of what I was definitely going for a kind of like this, like you seeing this in how it is taught in Haven should show you who's in power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Elder Rice, we're coming for you. Yeah. I think too, what really stood out too. So at some point, the entire place goes up in flames. So what was, and we talked about it earlier, it was cold. Now all of a sudden it's hot. It's, the devil's breath has truly come all the way in, into Mr. Waterman's, white mansion. And at the point where, so now here's this bookend, and I'm wondering if you did this on purpose. I'm betting that you did. Go back to Thomas. So here's the kill the cat moment at the start. We get to the end, and there's the save the cat bookend, but she still doesn't get to save the cat because Rose says, let us burn. Just let us burn. Talk to me about that. Why that choice? It's very powerful.
Well, so she's like, I need to save this person. And so it's like that inclination there is like, a little part of her arc where she tries to save Rose. And she says, but you'll die. And Rose says, I think we already did. I can't remember. So they're like, that was kind of getting at a thing that that really freaks me out in horror, which is like specifically body horror that gets to a point where it's so bad that you are completely cognizant, but you're like, there's no coming back from this. I cannot survive this. I'm so irreparably changed and hurt that I can't be what I was. And the idea of that has always very, very much scared me in horror. So that's kind of like where they are, the people that have been like turned into marionettes, is that they're dead. They've been dead. They're kept alive by something. They don't know what, but they're basically dead. You can't just take them off of the platforms and then they just walk back into town. They're not gonna get better. And it's also kind of a physical manifestation of what happens when you hurt somebody. Right? Like when you hurt somebody, they can't be what they were. They're different. There's something else. And if you try to help somebody, and that's the other thing, so she tries to help her and she's like, let us burn. And sometimes the way that you can help somebody is like to let them do their own path. And so she does that, but it feels terrible because she's like, I think I left them to die, or maybe they're already dead. I don't know. but I left them and I feel really bad about that. And then she continues on her journey, not without having experienced that and inside herself being different. And she notices that as she's running away and when she catches herself in the mirror.
This is so good. It's just, man, this is so good. I feel so much, one, just thank you for, making the time, to talk to me about that.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
When I get through these next 3, please come back on and talk to me about those,
For sure.
'cause I'm pretty sure I'm going to want to pack those and dive into those the same way I'm diving into these. You want to tell everybody where, they can get this, can, find other pieces that you've done, where can, apart from Exile, where can people find your work? Yeah.
For sure. You can find me on all social media at Kelly Nugee, KELLYNUGEE. You can also, I stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/Kelly Nugee, same thing. As far as my other projects,
what else do you have coming up?
I do a podcast called Teen Creeps, and it's where we talk about the YA pulp fiction of the 80s and 90s. So like Christopher Pike, Fear Street, all that stuff. That's anywhere you find your podcasts. Exile you can get anywhere you find your podcasts also. And if you like it, leave a nice review. That's the best thing that helps a baby podcast. I'm trying to think. I also do a show called Same Day Shipping. It's a podcast where we take like different characters from all different media and like ship them with each other. So it's a very silly show. And then you can see me on Friday nights on TBS on a show called Super Punch. It's a video game variety show, midnight Eastern. I'm on that show, and I'm also on a different TV show on El Rey Network, El Rey Nation. It's a pop culture discussion also. Man. But yeah, that stuff only started happening like last year though, and I've been really lucky with Super Punch that we've been able to shoot remotely, which is why I have this setup. Which is why I have this really nice camera.
I thought I had some. I'm like, no, you've got trees and all kinds of
No, it's crispy. Well, thank you for always including me in Thermo too. Like I always am so excited when I see that there's like a new script in my inbox, because that's always like I love voicing stuff for your show. There are some gigs that I don't love voicing. Like there are some where I'm like, okay, I guess I'll do this video. Like it's not, because it's voiceover, so you do like a variety of things. But this is one of the things that I'm always like, yay, another Thermo thing, or like whatever, like another Omar thing in general. So yeah, it's always really fun.
Yeah, it makes me feel really, really good. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Omar the Barbarian podcast. I want to thank my guest, Kelly Nugent, for coming on. And like I said, we're going to have you back to talk episodes 4 through 6. I don't know. It's my first one of these episodes. I don't know. I need to come up with a catchphrase or something. I'll come up with something. Until then, easy. Peace.